Some memories sit somewhere in the back of your mind, but every once in a while, something brings them back, and suddenly they're as vivid as they were the first time they happened. That's what this is for me. I was reminded of this when my younger brother asked me for some money a short while back. He explained that he needed it to go on a spring break trip with his friends. I didn't shut him down or anything, but I remember feeling weird about it. It's not like I didn't understand the appeal. When I was his age, I would have done the exact same thing without thinking twice. In fact, that's probably why it stuck with me, because it reminded me of a trip I took when I was about 22, back when I thought I had a pretty good handle on risk and consequence. I didn't. None of us really do at that age. And that trip ended up being one of the worst decisions I've ever made. At the time, I was dating a woman named Talia. She was a little more adventurous than I was, the kind of person who didn't like being told no, especially when it came to things that felt harmless. Instead of going somewhere crowded for spring break, she suggested we head out to a quieter coastal town a few hours away. Her aunt had a small place there, nothing fancy, but close enough to cliffs and hiking trails that it felt like a private escape from everything. The first couple of days were exactly what you'd expect. Long walks on the shore, cheap food, and that feeling that time had slowed down just enough for you to forget everything waiting for you back home. It felt easy, relaxed, the kind of trip you wish could last forever. Looking back, well, I think that's part of why what happened next felt so jarring. There wasn't any build-up to it, things just changed suddenly. On the third day, we decided to check out a trail Talia had read about online. It wasn't anything famous, just one of those lesser-known paths that supposedly led to a cliffside overlook. When we got there, though, the entrance was blocked off with a simple wooden barrier. There wasn't much explanation, just a notice saying the trail was temporarily closed. No details, nothing that warned of any impending danger. I remember stopping right there and thinking that was the end of it. But Talia didn't see it that way. She stepped closer, glanced around to make sure no one was watching, and said it was probably just a precaution. Something minor. Before I could really argue, and as she had already slipped past the barrier and onto the trail, looking back at me like she expected me to follow. And I did. At first, it actually felt like we'd made the right call. The trail was quiet in a way that felt rare, especially during spring break. No other hikers, no distant voices, nothing but the sound of wind moving through dry brush and waves crashing somewhere below the cliffs. It gave the whole place this strange sense of isolation that felt exciting more than anything else. We kept walking for a while, maybe 20 minutes or so, and gradually the trail started to feel less maintained. The path narrowed slightly, with patches of loose dirt and sections where the direction wasn't as clear as it had been earlier. I pointed it out, half joking, but Talia brushed it off like it was nothing. Then we came across something that made both of us stop without saying a word. At the edge of the trail, partially tucked into the brush, was a small cluster of items that didn't belong there. It wasn't scattered randomly like lost belongings usually are. Everything was grouped together in a way that felt deliberate. There was a worn-out backpack, a couple of pieces of clothing, and smaller things like a water bottle and what looked like a phone case. All of it was dusty, like it had been sitting there for a while. I remember trying to come up with a logical explanation almost immediately. Maybe someone ditched their stuff. Maybe it had been there for weeks, and no one bothered to clean it up. But it didn't sit right with me. Well, there was something about how neatly it was arranged that made it feel less like something abandoned and more like something placed. Talia noticed something else before I did. A few feet ahead of that pile, a piece of cord tied around a branch swayed slightly with the wind. It looked out of place in a way that immediately changed the mood. The quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. That was when we both agreed, without really needing to say it, that it was time to head back. We turned around and started retracing our steps, moving a little faster than before. Neither of us was talking much. It's strange how quickly your brain can go from settled to racing with all manners of thoughts. A few minutes into the walk back, we heard something behind us. We both stopped at the same time. It was one of those moments where you don't want to confirm what you think you might see. But eventually, I looked back over my shoulder. There was nothing there. Nothing explained the sound. I told myself it could have been anything. An animal, loose debris, or even just something falling on its own. We moved faster this time. Another minute passed before we heard something again. That's when Talia grabbed my arm. She didn't say anything. She just tightened her grip enough for me to understand she heard it too. We started walking as fast as we could without breaking into a full run, both of us trying to stay calm while clearly thinking the same thing. That we weren't alone out there. That someone or something was close enough to follow us without being seen. Then, out of nowhere, and we heard an unsettling sound echoing through the trees that didn't belong in the woods. Talia froze in her tracks for a second before I pulled her forward. "Don't stop," I told her, even though my own voice didn't sound steady. We broke into a run after that, not caring about losing our footing or direction anymore. The only thing that mattered was getting back to the entrance as quickly as possible. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone coming after us, but every time I looked, there was nothing there. The trail felt longer on the way back. By the time we finally saw the barrier up ahead, both of us were out of breath and completely on edge. For a moment, it felt like we were finally out of whatever that situation was. But that feeling didn't last, because standing near the entrance, arm just off to the side of the trail, was a man. He wasn't in any kind of uniform, no badge, no official markings, just standing there with his arms loosely at his sides, watching us approach. There was nothing outwardly aggressive about him, but something about the way he was standing there didn't feel right. We slowed down without meaning to. As we got closer, he glanced past us, towards the trail behind us, then back at us again. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes lingered a second longer than normal. "Trail's closed," he said. That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. Just that. We didn't argue, didn't ask questions. We just stepped past the barrier and kept moving until we were far enough away that neither of us felt like we needed to look back. We didn't report it, didn't tell anyone official. At the time, it felt easier to just leave it alone and pretend it wasn't as strange as it felt. But even now, years later, there's one thing that still bothers me. It's not the items we found, not the rope, not even that sound. It's that man. Because I can't shake the feeling that he already knew we had gone in, and that he was waiting to see if we were coming back out. Sometimes the scariest situations aren't the ones where something happens. They're the ones where something almost happens, and you're left trying to figure out what you just walked away from. Those moments don't give you closure. They just sit in your head, replaying in different ways every time you think about them. This is one of those for me, and it didn't even feel like a big deal at first. This happened last spring break, when I was 23. My friends Caleb, Nina, and Tessa had suggested that we go somewhere quiet and relaxing for spring break, unlike our peers who would probably go out partying somewhere. Tessa suggested a beach she'd visited once before, somewhere so far out that it was rarely ever visited by tourists. It sounded perfect at the time. Private, calm, and a break from everything else. We got there later than we planned, and by the time we parked and carried our stuff towards the beach, the sun was already setting. The place was completely empty. No other cars, no distant voices, nothing but the sound of waves and the wind moving across the sand. At first, it felt like we got lucky, like we'd found a spot no one else knew about. We didn't waste time setting up. Caleb and I handled the tents while the others unpacked smaller things and tried to get a fire going before it got too dark. I had brought my dog, Rex, with us. and watching him run across the sand, completely unaware of anything else, made everything feel normal, grounded. Like this was exactly how the trip was supposed to go. At one point, Nina pointed out a car on the access road behind the dunes. It was an older SUV, though moving slowly enough that it stood out against how empty everything else was. It passed by without stopping, disappearing down the narrow path until we couldn't see it anymore. None of us thought much of it. It was a public area. Someone else being around wasn't strange. We went back to what we were doing. By the time we finished setting up and sat down, it was almost fully dark. The fire gave us just enough light to see each other, and everything beyond that faded into shadow. The conversation was easy, the kind that drifts without direction when there's nothing else pulling your attention. For a while, it felt like exactly the kind of night we had planned. Then an SUV arrived. It appeared along the same narrow road, moving slower than before, almost like it was searching for something. It didn't pass us right away. Instead, it slowed even more, and then stopped. It was parked directly across from where we were. For a few seconds, no one said anything. We just watched it, trying not to make it obvious that we were watching. The engine was still running, but the lights were off, which somehow made it more noticeable. Eventually, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, but he didn't come toward us right away. He stood by the car for a moment, looking in our direction, though it was hard to tell exactly where his focus was in the dark. Then he started walking, slow and uneven, like he wasn't in any kind of rush to get where he was going. Caleb and I stood up, more out of instinct than anything else. Not aggressive, just aware. Rex followed without being called. He wasn't barking or growling, just watching, more alert than he had been all night. When the man got close enough, he stopped far enough that his actions felt intentional. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Caleb broke the silence, keeping things light. "Hey, you good?" The man didn't answer right away. He looked past us briefly, toward the tents, then back again. "You staying out here?" he asked eventually. Caleb nodded and said we were just camping for the night. The man didn't react much to that. He just stood there for another second, then gave a small nod, like he had gotten the answer he needed. Without saying anything else, he turned around and walked back toward his SUV. None of us moved until he got back inside. A few seconds later, the engine revved slightly, and the vehicle pulled away, disappearing down the same narrow road it had come from. The moment he was gone, the mood changed. Nobody said it out loud, but we didn't feel as relaxed anymore. We tried to brush it off, told ourselves it was nothing, just someone passing through, maybe checking who was out there. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even confrontational. But the feeling didn't go away. After a while, we decided to call it a night much earlier than we'd planned. Not because anything had happened, but because none of us really felt like sitting out there anymore. We put out the fire, zipped up the tents, and tried to sleep. That's when Rex sat up, completely still, facing something outside. I stayed quiet, trying to hear what he was hearing, but all I could pick up was the wind and the distant sound of the water. Still, he didn't relax. He just stayed there, focused on something. After a few minutes, he let out a low, controlled growl. I didn't open the tent. I don't know why, but something in me said not to. Instead, I just listened. At some point, I thought I heard movement outside, the kind of sound you question even as you're hearing it, because you're not sure if your mind is making things up. Rex didn't move. He just kept staring in the same direction. Eventually, the sound stopped. I don't know how long it took before I finally fell asleep, but when I woke up, the first thing I noticed was how quiet everything was again. Daylight had already started to creep in, softening everything around us. When we stepped outside, nothing looked out of place. No footprints near the tents, no sign that anyone had come close during the night. It should have made me feel better. It didn't. because as we packed up and headed back toward the parking lot, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. Tire tracks, on fresh ones. They ran along the access road, slowed near where we had been camped, and then continued on. Maybe it was the same SUV, maybe it wasn't. But what scared me was the feeling that the stop the night before hadn't been random, that he hadn't just been passing through, and that whatever Rex had seen was something we weren't supposed to see. I still go back and forth in my head about that night, trying to convince myself I overreacted. But there are a few details I can't explain away, no matter how much I try. This happened during spring break in 2023. My friend Kayla and I had just turned 22, and we decided to take a quick trip to a city we'd both wanted to visit for a while. It was one of those last-minute plans that somehow came together perfectly. We'd secured a cheap rental in a decent location, and we had just enough time for it to feel like a real getaway. We were staying in a neighborhood that felt quiet compared to the main areas in the city. We got in late the first night, so we didn't do much beyond checking in and walking to a nearby spot for drinks. It was relaxing, exactly what you'd expect for a trip to somewhere unfamiliar. The next day, though, we decided to go all in and spend most of it out by the water. We grabbed towels from the rental, called a ride, and stayed out there for hours just soaking everything in. Like you'd expect during spring break, people came up to talk to us throughout the day. Some were friendly, some were a little too forward, but nothing unusual. We handled it the same way we always did, with polite, short responses, and then continued with our own conversation. Most people moved on quickly, except for one. He approached casually, like he wasn't trying too hard, confident without being pushy, which honestly made him stand out more than anything else. He introduced himself, asked a couple of normal questions, and somehow the conversation didn't feel forced the way those interactions usually do. There was something about him that made him easy to talk to, and even though we had just met. At some point, he asked what we were doing later that night, and before I thought too much about it, I told him we didn't have solid plans yet. He smiled, said he might be around, and asked for my number. I hesitated for maybe half a second, then gave it to him. After that, he didn't linger. He just nodded, said he'd text me, and walked off down the beach without stopping to talk to anyone else. Kayla joked about it, but I could tell she found it a little strange too. Not in a bad way. It was just unusual. Still, we brushed it off and went on with the rest of the day, bouncing between the beach and a couple of nearby spots before heading back to the rental once things started getting crowded. Back at the house, we changed, grabbed drinks, and sat out in the small backyard area, playing music and talking about what to do next. At some point, I remembered I had his number and decided to text him. He replied almost immediately. That stood out a little, but at the time, I didn't think much of it. He said he and his friend were nearby and suggested we all meet up. It didn't feel unusual since we were trying to come up with plans ourselves, so we agreed to have them come by before going out. They showed up not long after. His friend seemed quiet, but friendly. We all sat outside, talking, drinking, easing into the night the way people do when everything feels like it's going according to plan. After a while, we decided to head out. The place we ended up at wasn't anything special. Just a crowded bar with loud music and people packed closer than they should have been. At first, it was fun. We found a spot and let ourselves get caught up in the energy of it. But as the night went on, things started to blur a little. At some point, Kayla and his friend went somewhere else, leaving me standing with him near the bar. It wasn't intentional, just one of those things that happens when places get crowded and people move around without thinking much about it. After a bit, I told him I was going to the restroom. Before I walked away, he asked what I wanted to drink next. I told him without thinking much of it. But when I came back, something felt off. It wasn't obvious. Nothing I could point to right away. just a feeling that something wasn't lining up the way it had a few minutes earlier. The way he was acting near the table felt calculated. My instinct told me something in the atmosphere had changed, and I knew right then I shouldn't go back. That was enough. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask questions. I just stepped back and moved away before he noticed I was there. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it, that it could have been nothing, but the feeling didn't go away. It followed me as I moved through the crowd, looking for Kayla and not finding her anywhere. That's when I decided to leave. Once I was outside, I tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. I sent a message instead, telling her where I was and asking if she was okay. When I got back to the house, everything was still and quiet. I let myself in, locked the door, and sat there for a while, trying to shake the feeling off. I kept checking my phone, waiting for her to respond, replaying the moment at the bar in my head, on trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything. That's when I heard a soft sound near the back entrance. Then the faint tapping of the keypad. Someone was entering numbers. My phone buzzed almost immediately after. A message from Kayla's number telling me to open the back door. I stood there for a second, staring at the screen. Then I walked closer to the door and called her name. No answer. I tried calling her. It rang, but no one picked up. Another message came through, telling me to hurry. That uneasy feeling came back. Stronger than before. Not panic exactly, just a very clear sense that something wasn't right. I didn't open the door. Instead, I moved to the front and checked through the peephole. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed movement. Someone was standing just out of view, close enough that I could tell they were there, but not enough to make out who it was. I stepped back immediately. A few seconds later, the tapping at the back door stopped. The messages stopped too. I don't know how long I stood there without moving, just listening, waiting to see if anything else would happen. Eventually, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was actually Kayla. She sounded confused, said she had just gotten back to the rental and was at the front. When I opened the door for her, she was alone. I asked her if she had been at the back earlier, or if she had texted me. She said no. We didn't stay there another night. And even now, when I think back on it, the part that sticks with me isn't what I saw. It's how close I came to opening that door without thinking twice. And that brings us to the end of this video. Before you click away, take a second and look around. Make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. Make sure nothing feels off. And if you enjoy stories like these, then go ahead and subscribe to Deep Horror TV, because there's always more, and the next story might hit a little closer than you expect.